Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Thank you so much for joining me for the second time in the day for this short little episode that I'm going to do on Bhutan. A lot of people have asked questions as to what is exactly happened and why did the Prime Minister of Bhutan actually mention what he mentioned. There's a lot of media narrative that has been created, a lot of interests around the world, as a matter of fact, because India China relations are watched by pretty much everyone. Having said that, how much of it, how much of the narrative which we see in our media is real, and how much of it is something that we need to understand and comprehend? Bhutan is an interesting country. I've been covering this country through the neighborhood talks that I keep doing on my channel, which will give you a flavor of what's exactly happening in the neighborhood and how things are going to, pan out, and especially looking at the Chinese influence within the neighborhood. Now, what we need to look at with regards Bhutan is very simple: is the factor that what is the history with regards Bhutan and India, what is actually happening with regards China, what is the Doklam standoff all about, and what exactly was said by the Prime Minister. Is it actually as bad as it being portrayed to us or not? For any such discussion, one very important thing is that we need to look at a little bit of history and understand who we are talking about. 90% of the time we kind of miss that, and we take it at face value, and we actually uh, get a little angry with regards how things are going across. So that's something that we need to be careful of, because we can actually land up into a lot of trouble when we do analysis like that. And that is something, again, I've been seeing all over the media, that it's a very short-handed, short stick analysis where uh, I don't think they've actually studied the entire issue. Let me be very, very clear about it. There's a lot more to this particular narrative that needs to be understood. There's a lot more that needs to be uh, brought about, and I'll try and do a little bit of that on this particular show. Right. Let me just add this little presentation that I made for you guys on the screen. Before I do, guys, please do like this video. Those of you watching right now and will watch this video later, please do like this video, subscribe to the channel, very important. Uh, and if you can, please do help out the DevTalks efforts by, there's a QR code right there if you want to do a direct transfer, or you can actually send us a super sticker, super chat, or become a member, which is what Anikesh has done. Thank you so much, Anikesh, for becoming a member of DevTalks. Uh, so India, China, and Bhutan, what is this entire game all about? We need to understand, as I said. Let's dig into it a little bit. Before we do, what did the Bhutanese PM actually say? Right? Uh, Let me just get into a little bit of a history about Bhutan. Let me just take 2 minutes and talk to you about the history of Bhutan. Bhutan is an interesting country. It has had a long history, as a matter of fact, and the current setup of Bhutan came into being in 1907, when this particular dynasty came into force. The name is a bit heavy for me, so it just doesn't ring off my memory. But the present king's lineage came into force. Now, by the year 1960, as a matter of fact, Bhutan had a deal with the British Empire where the British would protect it, and Bhutan had certain amount of autonomy, and the British would kind of, you know, had a sort of a monetary deal with the country as well. Post independence of India in 1949 or 50, Bhutan entered into a same protectorate sort of an agreement wherein India would advise Bhutan with regards to its foreign policy and would be responsible for its security. Now, that's a very important thing that we need to understand. This is in their constitution as well. Now, that particular constitution was written in 2007, when the, the father of this current king, he basically abdicated and he put this gentleman in charge. There was a constitution written, and Bhutan basically turned around into a, a a parliamentary monarchy. So it was sort of a it's a constitutional monarchy, if I may, like just like England or any other country. The king is more than a figurehead. He does have a certain amount of powers in terms of foreign exchanges, in terms of uh, his military a little bit and stuff like that. This particular king, mind you, is an ex NDA, so that's the relationship which has been existing between both the countries. It's a beautiful little place. It's supposed to be one of the happiest countries in the world. The real happiness, not these stupid indexes that they keep putting out. It's a beautiful country. People are very sweet and nice. They're concentrating hardcore on their tourism. As a matter of fact, last week when I did the neighborhood watch, I had mentioned this, that they are actually now going to be selling gold on their duty free shops. So they're actually wanting to kind of invigorate the tourism industry within there. They have certain rules where they only allow people with a certain amount of money before you come inside there. They have certain, you know limits to the tourists that they would actually take into. They don't go beyond that, and it's a very super clean country. Now, Bhutan has, of course, as we all know, a border with China. A border with China means, of course, there is a dispute. There is a whole story behind that, which we will get into. Now, as I said, Bhutan is a parliamentary monarchy. Now, what did the Bhutanese Prime Minister say? He said last month, Bhutanese delegation visited China, and we are now awaiting the arrival of a Chinese technical team in Bhutan. After one or two more meetings, we would probably be able to draw a line with regards to the Bhutan China border. He was questioned about the intrusion into the country. There are loads of reports that the Chinese have built in villages in the northern part of Bhutan, uh, encroaching into Bhutanese territory. He very steadfastly said that there is no incursion. We know where we stand, and we know where they stand, so there is no incursion of any sort. This is highly debated within India as well with regards to these Chinese villages that have been built up within Bhutan. A lot of people say that they have been, a lot of people say that they have not. The reality of this entire thing is difficult to judge over a satellite map, because at the end of it, these satellite maps are being provided to us by, whole lot of individuals which have their own motives and stuff like that. So I don't want to get into that. But I do believe that there has been a certain amount of incursion where certain Bhutanese territory in the north has been walloped by the Chinese, the same way that they've done with the Nepalese as well. Now, in 2019, the Prime Minister said that the existing tri-junction should not be disturbed unilaterally, and that statement was pretty much hailed in India. Everybody said, yeah, this is the way to go. It should not be unilaterally done. It has to be done through dialogue and this and that, and settlement of the dispute or whatever of the border that needs to be done. He said, we are ready. We can discuss as soon as the other two parties are ready. India and China have problems along their border, and we are waiting to see how they will settle their differences. He also said that this is a trilateral issue. It is something that involves India, China, and Bhutan. This was taken to be the factor that the Bhutanese are giving legitimacy to the Chinese claims and legitimacy towards China, and they're kind of shifting away from the Indian, uh, I won't say control, but Indian influence. Now, if you read the last point that I've given here very carefully, we can discuss this as soon as the other two parties are ready. That means it's a tripartite sort of an arrangement. India and China have problems along their border. We are waiting to see how they settle their differences. This is a very interesting and important thing. That means we all know that the Chinese and us, we have issues on the line of actual control, and of course the Bhutanese and every other country is watching how who wins in this entire thing. So that's something which is pretty normal. But the mention of the trilateralism of this particular relationship was taken far too long as far as an analysis was concerned. Chinese and Bhutanese have been actually doing these talks since 1984. They've had 24 rounds of talks. This was, I think, the 25th. And in October 2021, they signed up a three-step roadmap, which will tell us how to demarcate their boundaries. Uh, this is a roadmap which is interesting because this actually talks about confidence building measures. It talks about setting up, boundary lines and ridge lines and this and that and the other. So this is a very interesting step that both the countries took. Uh, Physically, they have met 11 times to discuss this, as I mentioned that both the teams had gone up and down to kind of discuss these matters and stuff like that. The interesting part about the Bhutan China relationship is that the Bhutanese are very clearly aware of what kind of stuff that the Chinese are intending to do. This is, of course, Global Times propaganda that came on the 14th of March. And if you read the Global Times today, it's full of it. Past 2 days has been interesting. How India tries to interfere in and take control of Bhutan. Now, one thing that the Chinese don't want to understand that the bilateral agreement between India and Bhutan with regards its security and advice on foreign affairs is written in their constitution. Unless and until the Bhutanese actually change their constitution, that sort of a relationship will exist. The Chinese, of course, will not want to accept it. These are the disputes that the China and the Chinese and the Bhutanese have. The top two ones, Jakarlung and Pasamlung, is a old dispute where the Chinese actually claim this entire area. It's about 470 square kilometers or area. Then, of course, the Doklam area, which the Chinese, which is actually known as Dolam. The Doklam is something which is a very Chinese. Donglang is what the Chinese call it. So that's the Chinese word for it. This is an issue that cropped up. This has been a dispute for a while, but this is an issue that cropped up during 2017, the Doklam standoff, or the Dolam standoff, as we should call it in India, where Indian and Chinese forces actually, you know, faced off with each other for about close to 2 months, 2+ months, actually 72 or 75 days. And then the Chinese, if I may use the word, blinked and went back. There are loads of reports that there's a huge amount of Chinese construction which has happened in the region, uh, but they've done it in their own territories in this particular area. There's a little bit of a this thing because people look at the line being straight. In mountains, the lines are drawn along the ridge lines. Sometimes you will find yourself being on a height and the other guy sitting under you and probably a little behind you because of he's there in the valley. So that's a little bit of a differential of difference of perception that actually comes across. If you look to the right of your screen, you will also see the Sakteng Wildlife Sanctuary, which has pretty much no contact with China. There's no road, there's nothing, but they've now claimed this. How did this build up? Was during 2016, the Bhutanese 2015, 16, sometime the Bhutanese had put in a request to the international organizations to give them a certain loan to develop this wildlife sanctuary. Now, Bhutanese are very, very particular about their forests and this and that, so they wanted to develop this further. And the Chinese put a stopgap and said, no, no, this is disputed territory, and that's when this thing came out. Now, one thing that you can see on top of the Saktang Wildlife Sanctuary is the city of Tawang, where the recent standoff also took place a little, closer towards the Indo-China border. Uh, if the Chinese, and hypothetically, take this Saktang Wildlife Sanctuary, you can imagine they'll be sitting behind Tawang, and that's something which is obviously worrying India. Uh, the biggest point, I'm going to repeat this again, is that this place has no connection whatsoever with the Chinese. What they're trying to do is do an exchange of a sort of a basis that yaar humko ye de do, aap wo le lo, ye de do, wo le lo, and all that stuff. So what they say is, you give us the Doklam and the Saktang, and you take the other two. We don't need it. On the north, this is it's a typical salami slicing tactic of the Chinese, and this is what they do. So I'm not very surprised. The issue with this entire thing, and as I said, Donglang region, is that it sits on top of the Chumbi Valley, right? And we've got the very dangerous for India Siliguri corridor in that particular region, and of course the tri junction between the India-China Bhutan border, which is, of course, it's written here as Sikkim China Bhutan tri junction. The problem is a peak, okay, and I'll show this to you here. There's a peak called Genmochen. If you look right below the arrow, right, there's a peak called Genmochen, which is about 14,495 feet, as mentioned here. This particular peak is that India and China has a dispute on which peak is the Genmochen peak. There's the Chinese, they'll find a reason for creating a tamasha on every little thing. So there's a bit of a difference of perception. Remember this Genmochin peak, and I will actually talk to you about it as we go forward. Now, if you look at this particular map, This particular map shows you 2 points. One is the Ginmochin position of the Tri Junction as per China, and Batangla, which is a little bit above Ginmochin, which is the position of the Tri Junction as per India. Now, that is the difference of perception. The Chinese say that the Batangla peak is actually Ginmochin, and Ginmochin is actually Batangla, and we say the opposite side. Now, the shaded part around is the additional area that the Chinese actually claim, which is inside Bhutan. It's not inside India, so that's something which is quite funny. Uh, the idea, and I'll show you another map which will give you a little bit of an orientation. Let me just get rid of this bottom thing here so that I'll be able to explain this to you. Let's start from the top of the map. You see the Siliguri corridor, which is right there. You see the second thing which is written there is called the Jamperi Ridge. Jamperi Ridge is a place where if you stand there, you'll be able to see the entire activity in the Siliguri corridor. And we know the Siliguri corridor is pretty vulnerable as far as we are concerned. It's called the chicken's neck. It's called, it's the main contact region, uh, which is from the mainland India into the northeastern states. There is a lot of work, a lot of study and some work which is happening with regards to expanding the chicken's neck by actually using a route that would be going into Bangladesh. So in case of war, certain things could be done, and there's some amount of movement in that entire area as well. Now, if you look on the right hand side, you can see these yellow lines, right? These are the borders. If you look on the right hand side, Batangla is something that you'll be able to see at the bottom left of your screen, center right of your screen. I'm sorry. Now, center right of your screen is Batangla, and then if you go straight up, you'll see the Mount Ginmochin. It's written as Gipmochin, Ginmochin, a lot of different variants of the name. Now, if you notice, the Chinese are saying where I've got this map which says Batangla, they are saying this is it's the opposite way around. Let me just say this very clearly. They want to actually come across towards, right there towards where it is mentioned Mount Ginmochin. The problem with this entire thing is that it is not the way it looks like here. It is the opposite way. As I told you in this particular map, Ginmochin is closer to the Siliguri corridor, and Batangla is on the India, China, Bhutan Tri Junction. But when you see this map, it's mentioned the other way around. And that's interesting because this is again a Chinese propaganda map that I picked up. The clash basically happened during Doklam, where the Chinese basically wanted to build a road up to the plateau, and they would be able to reach up to the Jamperi Ridge pretty easily, which will give them a right thing down uh, into the Siliguri corridor. Mind you, this area, a lot of people think that this is very, loosely guarded and this and that. That's not the case. There's a huge setup of the armed forces which is there even now, and we literally occupy the peaks in this particular region. uh, there's air bases, there's army bases, there's a whole lot of setup which actually takes care of this particular region. uh, as I again said, in mountain warfare, I'm not a army person, but it's a very very simple logic. Learning from so many learned army person, people who've actually come on my channel, one thing that I can understand is if you control the heights, you control the area, and that is what we are doing at this particular point of time. Now, in 2012, India China reached an agreement that said the tri-junction boundary points which are there between India, China, India, Myanmar, India, China, Bhutan, India, China, Myanmar, and India, China, Nepal shall be agreed upon in consultation with the concerned countries. During the Doklam crisis, of course, the Chinese backed off and said, no, 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 this is not. Oh, concerned country did not mention this name, this that. So the thing that we need to understand about China is they use something called lawfare, right? They will twist the entire narrative on you with regards agreements. That's how the Chinese function. So it should not be a surprise to us when we see these kind of maneuvers, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people who've come on the channel and spoken about India-China borders and the LAC is that none of the agreements today are in a place where you can actually trust China. The baseline of trust between both the countries has gone down to such an extent that the trust factor is just not there. So it's today fair enough you sign, but you verify. and that's something which has been taken up by the Indian Armed Forces pretty strongly. Even during the Ladakh standoff, we found the same dialogue coming across, that trust but verify, and that's something that we need to understand. The Chinese have a very interesting game here. They of course want to keep us on the toes, and I let me just hide this out because actually that's the key part of it. Uh, they want to keep us on the toes in all the areas, and one must understand any Chinese moves. Summer is coming, so something will be on the card sometime or the other if the Chinese have their nuts loose, which I presume they have. Of course, Xi Jinping is supposed to come into India. A lot of Chinese delegates are supposed to come into India. Either the Chinese will completely back off and try and build the relationship, or the Chinese will do something to kind of keep the tension up and keep their upper hand to show India down during the SEO summit. Now, both the possibilities are pretty real, because at the end of it, I personally believe that very, very clearly, that there is a dilemma that the Chinese face today with regards to Taiwan. Because if that thing heats up, they have a huge threat coming in from India as well if the standoff still continues. So the Chinese would be debating this, and it's not all win-win Chinese when they stand in Ladakh or anywhere else for that matter. The narrative is that भाई Chinese वहाँ खड़े हैं, वो हमको पीछे भगा रहे हैं, ये कर रहे हैं, वो कर रहे हैं. It's not how it is. The Chinese also go through a lot of pressure and a lot of problems when they actually stand on the borders and stuff like that. Now, nothing can happen without Indian consent. This is the first thing that I want to put across. A lot of people don't understand that these things have been enshrined within the constitution of Bhutan. Uh, of course, movements here and there and statements here and there would take place. The Bhutanese, to my mind, as I said, are trying to brush off the intrusions that have actually happened in the northern part of Bhutan, which is a problem for us because at the end of it, we guarantee the safety. So it's not a win-win for India all the time, but there is an issue that India needs to deal with regards to Bhutan uh, and China. One of the things that comes out is that India would have a lot more force to actually exert if it actually fixes up its own agreements with China. So, as I said, the Prime Minister said very clearly that we are waiting and watching to see how India handles its own disputes with China. Now, intensifying Chinese pressure, this is something that we can see all the time. And I'll explain to you what the pressure and how the Prime Minister's statement needs to be interpreted with regards to pressure. Is there money in the fray? Because that's what the Chinese do. I don't think so at the moment, but that's something that India must keep in mind because that's how the Chinese work. If you look at what happened in Nepal, KP Sharma Oli and the entire game with the India Nepal border actually started out with that. Now, this is a brand new democracy, right? It's a brand new country in this particular format. It's an old country, but it's a brand new format of governing. Diplomacy takes time to learn, right? So either I'm just considering all the possible things. Is it that he slipped to say something? I personally don't think so, but it's a possibility. So it's a transformation. Transform. It's the country is transforming. It's going to transform from a monarchy where the king used to, with his advisors after 1960, take the decisions, and today a parliament is actually taking a decision. This particular parliament system has been there for a while. Uh, the king also used to use them, and their heads of little districts and stuff like that used to be elected and brought into the parliament. But where a parliament is going to take its own decisions, it's a relatively new phenomenon as far as Bhutan is concerned. Now, as I said, security from external threats is guaranteed by India, which by treaty considers any attack on Bhutan as an attack on India. Let me make that very clear. That's part of the treaty. Okay. So now a lot of us will say, यार अगर वो ऊपर कुछ कर रहा है, if he's done some intrusions, why isn't the Indian army going and doing something about it? Well, it's not always that you want to respond to everything that actually happens. You'll have to kind of balance it out. And India, China are embroiled in a whole series of things. Getting into another thing on the other side of Bhutan is going to be quite difficult. I guess this is my opinion. Secondly, I know lesser than what the government and the army would know. So I guess what they're doing is with regards to the complete information that they have with their own hands. The army and the government have been pretty responsive as far as when I say the army, I mean the armed forces have been pretty responsive and on time with regards to Chinese aggression or Chinese tactics in the region for the past 3 4 years. So let's have a little trust on our forces who are actually handling the situation as far as tactical situation on the ground is concerned. China has also stepped up efforts to establish formal diplomatic relations with Bhutan. By the way, the neighboring country to China does not have any diplomatic exchanges. They don't have a diplomatic relation between Bhutan and China, and they've been pushing for it. So that now explaining you why they've been pushing for it is a very simple thing. If the Bhutan China relationship is a bilateral relationship, then the Chinese can actually push Bhutan to keep India away because a bilateral relationship is between two countries. It's not a trilateral relationship. So the Chinese will try and twist that narrative in that aspect. And that's called lawfare at the end of it. They will try and do that. So they've been pushing Bhutan for establishing formal diplomatic relations. Now, one of the possibilities could be that they've just had a discussion, they're trying to sort out something in the north, and he doesn't want to rile up China by saying something here and there. This particular interview was given to a Belgian TV. I don't know how, but it's interesting. So, as I said, one of the possibilities could be he does not want to rile China. Quite fair enough. We can understand that. I'm not saying I believe that. I'll tell you what I believe, but possibility. Now, India has to solve its border to give Bhutan the confidence. This is something I believe. As have said this is the third time I'm mentioning in this particular program as well. Any country that India is trying to help against China would also say, "यार अपना तो sort out कर लो भाई." So the resolution towards the India-China border has to be brought into bear in the next few years. It has to happen. Otherwise, we are going to start losing face. And it's something that we discussed with Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma some time ago. And I've got somebody very special coming across in the next week or the next 10 days who's going to give us a little more in depth insight into the India China border potential resolution and pros and cons for each side of the game. So that's something that you guys should look forward for. The Dolam issue, of course, it is still very strong, and if I hear correctly, the rumor mill has it that the Indian deployment in that region has been pretty strong. As I said, we occupy the heights, and the Chinese have been kind of doing a little bit of creepy crawly infrastructure development in that area, which is in their territory as of now. Now, one thing that which will bring me now to the point that I want to make. Bhutan does deal with China on its own. It's been doing it since 1984. But understand this, every time that Bhutanese have a conversation with Chinese, a very senior a very senior leader from the Bhutanese government does come to India, has in depth discussions with the Indian government, talks about it, figures out a plan of action with India's advice and his own intentions and stuff like that, and then goes back to Bhutan and does whatever he has to. So the king of Bhutan this time is coming, and he'll be in India between the 3rd and 5th of April. A lot of people actually in the WhatsApp group that I have, a lot of people ask me that, what's happening here and this and that. I mentioned that there's a lot to this which we don't know. Okay. Every time, and this is the problem that I have with our media, is we are quick fire media. We just want to take up an issue, we take a statement probably out of context and start firing across what's happening around the place. Limited analysis on a particular statement is good, but when you overpower an analysis on just a statement, it does not make any sense, right? So the king of Bhutan himself is coming down here, so there's obviously a plan happening there. It's not something they've just had a meeting last week, and 3rd or 5th of April, which is day after tomorrow, he's coming to India. Now tell me, and I'm going to ask you this, the Chinese are all about messaging. The king coming here is not a message to China. The Chinese want to build this into a bilateral dispute so that they could put pressure on Bhutan. Bhutan keeps it as a trilateral issue, exactly what was mentioned by the Prime Minister. How did we interpret it? The other way around. Is the king not coming to India still a very clear message to China that where do the, I won't say loyalties, but where does the relationship actually lie? As far as the media is concerned, that's something I want to talk about. The Chinese games are on. They know that the West is attacking India. You are being a little defensive right now, so they're going to put out another one. And there are a number of people who within our country who are backbiters who will write articles, go on to TV shows, and this and that and the other. Now, at no point of time, I am trying to say that the threat from China in Dolam and towards Bhutan is any less. But overinterpretation of a statement, actually, not overinterpretation, I'd call it underinterpretation because it's not been thought about, is not okay. General Narayan had actually briefed us on a game of Vichy, where the Chinese will take these steps to kind of unravel you in certain areas. So you're probably getting a little stronger in Ladakh. You push them back in Tawang. Is this the next step that the Chinese are taking? We need to always look at that. We always look at it from a very incriminating way towards our own selves. I don't know why. Our armed forces are solid, and we all stand by our armed forces. I don't think there's anyone watching this show or watching the show later on who will not stand by our forces. But we get spun into the media narrative because you will have certain people coming across and saying this, that, and the other. I'm going to say this very simply. The Chinese wanted to make it a bilateral issue. The Prime Minister mentioned in the open media that it's a trilateral issue. No country is small or big. We are all equal partners, and we will need to sit down and discuss this. It's as simple as that. And the point that I'm trying to make is be careful of the media. Boys and girls, this is a problem within our country. We get so riled up and emotional about every little thing that we forget the bigger picture. I look at it in another way, in a whole different direction. And you may call me a very hardcore pro India person. I am. That's not a problem. But I look at it in a very simple way, and I want you all to think about this. It is actually a strong message to China. A week after the meeting, or 3 4 days after the meeting, the Prime Minister travels somewhere and he mentions this. It's not a bilateral issue, it's a trilateral issue. The king comes to India and he says, okay, whatever, he's going to talk. So there's a big interesting game that we need to look at. Of course, there's going to be a threat which I'm going to get people to talk about, right? General Shocking Chauhan is going to come and talk about it. Probably I'll put the show out Wednesday or something like that. I will also get Cloud RP who's going to give us a little more insight into this. But as a analysis, we need to look at it very, very carefully when we do these kind of analysis with regards to bilateral relationships or trilateral relationships that deal with China. Because the Chinese will have a habit of kind of messing you up within. And that's something that we need to understand very, very carefully. This is optics. Let me say this very clearly. And we are complicit in creating an anti-India optic 90% of the time. Because we fall for the same trap each time and every time. I'll give you a small example. In Ladakh, in the Pangong Tso Lake, right? Everybody says, oh, we've lost land, this, that, and the other. The Chinese supposedly came up to Finger 4. We saw these pictures of satellite images where the Chinese had written China on Finger 4. They had drawn a Chinese map on Finger 4. If you take a photograph, a satellite photograph of that area today, that map and the China name and all that stuff is not there. Here is so-called a superpower who comes into our land. Let me say that very clearly. The entire region is our land. Draws a map and gets pushed back. He has to wipe his map off and go back to his little hole in the wall, who won? That's the problem with us. We always look at us and say, oh, no, 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 we no, we lost. No, 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 झूठ बोल रहा है. Army झूठ बोल रही है. Government झूठ बोल रहा है. What is the interest in that? In today's day and age, you think you can survive by actually giving a false narrative about anything? We've seen narratives crashing around us all the time. And I'm a little forceful about this is because let the damn issue play out. Remember, nothing is done till it is done, right? It's important that we need to understand that the each country in the neighborhood which is stuck between India and China would play India and China for its own benefit. They would want to have great relations with both of these countries so that they can play them with each other. Yeah, these are two big, monkeys fighting. Let me be the cat and have a little fun. The Nepalese have been doing that. The Bangladeshis tried that. They got issues. The Sri Lankans tried it. They've had issues. The Pakistanis, of course, hedge their entire safety, their safety. Oh, China हमारा दोस्त है, ये है, वो है. We need to have that very, very clearly. We need to understand that very, very clearly that both the countries in any sort of a scenario will try and take advantage of a fight. When two people are fighting, you will try and take advantage of it. You'll say, no, no, I'm your best friend. Give me this. Go to the other guy. I'm your best friend. Give me this. Right? And it's a new democracy. That's something that we need to understand. This setup is very, very new. Democracies age, they take time. We call India a young country in its current form. 75 years. Bhutan is 15 years. Yeah. Its current governmental setup. It's an old country, but the setup of the government is 15, 16 years old. What we need to be concerned about is the growing Chinese influence within Bhutan, and has the Chinese been able to infiltrate the Bhutanese society by money and by other things that we all know what the Chinese do? That is something that we need to be concerned about. And I would recommend that we all keep a track of Bhutanese media, and if we do start seeing certain things around there, that should be a worrying factor. At the moment, I don't think so. There would be few that the Chinese would have done something wrong with, but overall, it's not the case. That's my opinion. That's what I wanted to tell you guys. And let me see if you guys have any thoughts. So please put this across. And guys, like the button, like, subscribe. If you can, do help out the Dev Talks efforts. QR code is right here, and you can become a member, or you can send us a super sticker or super chat. Now, I know these are IPL nights, and the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock thing is going to be very, very uh, slow. But I request you guys watch these shows because it's going to give you a different perspective, right? So let's see what you guys have to say. Is it true that US is trying to get a foothold in Sri Lanka and Bhutan becoming pro-China? Does India need to worry about, uh, uh, or is it too early to overreact and wait for some time? See, US is trying to get a foothold into Sri Lanka to push the Sri Lankans away from the Chinese, and there is no question about it. The US, I think, the CIA chief was there, so that stuff will go on. There's no really question about it. I don't think we need to worry about the US having interactions with these countries. Bhutan becoming pro-China is a little bit of a far this thing, Rahul. I don't think so. Having said that, I very clearly mentioned we need to keep a track of what is happening in the country. At the moment, I don't think so. They have very, very clear, uh, relationships with us. They don't have any diplomatic relations with China, and pro-China is a far-flung talk as far as that is concerned. In diplomacy and in geopolitics, reacting too fast is actually a death nail. We will look like Pakistan. That's what happens in Pakistan when a unthought of effort is put across and anybody and everybody starts commenting on things here and there and stuff like that. In India, thankfully, This government has been able to control a lot of these blabbermouths that used to talk. We need to be careful in what we speak. It does create trouble. Our whole media narrative and this and that creates trouble as far as geopolitics is concerned. As there have been silent whispers that Bhutan wants to increase its relationship with China, it's pretty open, as a matter of fact, and not want to only rely on India. Do you think is hysteria a result of that? They do want to improve the relationship with China. Trust me, there's nothing wrong with it. They are neighbors. They will want to have some trade and stuff like that. But as I said, look at it from a very clear thing. They know which side of the grass is green. If the Chinese are having a dispute with them, you think they will be pro China? They're trying to take their country. Okay, so I don't think it's going to be that easy. We need to understand whatever standoff that we have, the kind of anger within India against China is very, very strong. Why do we only believe that it's just India that's going to be angry? Nationalism is there in every country. Every country, every citizen of every country loves their country. So, I mean, there are few who don't. That's fine. But overall, people do like their country. Hysteria wise, Amay, I think, we need to understand, we need to create our own hysteria. Like the logic that I'm giving across needs to become a hysteria. Today morning, I tweeted for that matter. And I mean, I tweeted it very light heart and I said, Dev Talks is watching. Let me just read that out. It was an interesting thing. And I found it to be quite funny. And a lot of people, again, did. Uh, I said, Dev Talks is watching the. One second. Yeah, DevTalks is watching the use of judiciary and to silence opposition voices within America. Hashtag Trump. So, we need to look at very clearly that narratives again needs to be built by us. We don't want to build a narrative. We as citizens don't want to talk about it. We get very charged up over a certain situation, but do we follow through? We don't. How many of us actually go across and say, okay, Britain occupied Scotland, China occupied Quebec? It's a narrative. Our hysteria is more about condemning our own selves rather than doing anything else. And that's what I actually feel. Uh, John, you say been hearing that since 2000. Actually, 2017, I have been hearing that since 2000. You can see news reports even now. And I hear that the Bhutanese, you also say, and I recently hear that the Bhutanese PM made an India party to this conflict. So, no, exactly what I said, John. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Venki Saab, and the trivia which has come. The Indian formation with the PLA dreads most of the 17 Mountain Strike Corps guards this place. Saab, a lot more guards that place, trust me. These guys are super solid, and there's a lot more that guards that place. It's not something that is left for this thing, and you also say that it's the present home turf for the COAS. Uh, this is an area and a vulnerability which is everyone knows, and the strength that has been created in this area is unbelievable. Remember one thing: the 50-kilometer radius of that BSF zone also helped quite a bit in streamlining a lot of nonsense within this area as well. Okay, I think it'll be bad optics for China to try any tricks this year, as with India as G20 SEO chair. China will appear as the belligerent to anyone. Can't see an upside. Next year the game is on. I absolutely agree with you, but that's how a logical person will think. Is Xi Jinping logical? Anyone? The deal is that we need to look at, yeah, okay, Amay, you mentioned a very good thing, and I'm going to take this up. I think it was a conversation that you guys were having amongst yourself. I'm going to read this part, but money and everything plus, look, some of Bhutanese journalists who openly talk about an anti-India stance. They're an open country, they're a democratic country, they're going to have differential opinion. They would say, यार चाइना पैसे दे रहा है, यार तुम क्या इंडिया के पास खड़े हो, इंडिया तो इतने पैसे पूछे नहीं देता, प्रोजेक्ट लगा देता है, उसके बाद हमको ही काम करना पड़ता है, चाइना तो पैसे दे रहा है. See, that's something that we need to understand. The kind of investment that India has in Bhutan, the hydroelectric power projects, the whole lot of stuff which has been done in Bhutan has been done by India. Now, there will be few the Chinese will be able to feed here and there and put out these narratives. Don't we have pro-China writers and media people and so many Twitter guys, even unfortunately certain ex-uniformed people who write very, very pro-China and anti-India statements? That's how it is. Here is a smaller country who's been rather quiet, and now they're getting a certain voice and we're getting worried. Let them be, it's okay. We need to, we can't be overpowering as a big country around in the region. We need to let people be and come be brought to a certain conclusion by our efforts of diplomacy and stuff like that. Because if we overpower, then we become America. And nobody likes America at the end of it. So that's an issue. Right? Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Amay, you also say yes. I still haven't seen any erratic reaction by the government, so I think it's still stable. Absolutely, it is. When it was asked to the foreign affairs person who said that, yeah, what happened here and stuff like that, he said, relax. And let's relax. I mean, fair enough. This is something I'm happy that people are asking these questions. I'm happy people are more inquisitive about this. That's what I was when I started this channel. I wanted to know more. Why don't we know about this? Why isn't this being spoken about in media? And why isn't this? And then I started reading and reading and reading, and I realized there's just so much more that we just don't know. So it's how it is, right? Great point, Adi. Why would Bhutan be pro-China when China is trying to take their territory? That's like KP Sharma only, right? It's quite funny that they we will say, oh, bhai, switch off हो गया अभी तो Bhutan चले गया and this and that and the other. It's not like that. It's quite a different game. We need to look at it from a very, very simple way. These are, again, Bhutan is an independent country. It's not part of India. It is free to make its own decisions. It takes advisory from us in terms of foreign affairs, which is a strong advisory, and they heed to it, and it has security which is related to India. So that's something that we need to be very mindful of, right? They will have their bilateral relationships. For example, they've had a bilateral relationship with Sri Lanka where they're going to use uh, territory of India to send goods down to India into Bangladesh and actually come out of the port and start exporting stuff. That doesn't mean that they're leaving India. It's not. A country needs to trade. It cannot just rely on India 100% कि भाई हिंदुस्तान जी हमारा goods हैं आप ही लेके जाओ. It's also looking for options. There's nothing wrong with it. As a country grows, that's what they will do. Tomorrow, if what we expect out of Bhutan to do is hegemony, which is what the USA does. I don't think we should get into that. I think it should be a the ancient Indian way of handling things, which was influence. We had Chakravartis who used to handle the Indian influence within far flung regions. One of the reasons that we have temples all over the place. So they were not a part of India, but they had Indian influence. Night Library. Interesting name, I must say. One of solution of mindset of China of using agreement as tissue paper once they are in control is by interlinking every agreement in threads which other side needed to contemporary weakness of China. Uh, okay, if I may understand what you've actually written is that the Chinese kind of put across their they don't care about the agreements. Yeah, I don't think we in India need to know about that. They violated so many agreements with us. They violated agreements with Bhutan. Mr. Knight Library, are you from Bhutan? By the way, if you are, please do let me know. It'll be nice to actually get introduced. Uh, that's how China is. This is something that they do. Guys, thanks so much for joining me for this little episode. Not really little, they are comparatively little to my podcasts, which are over an hour. I hope you guys enjoyed the afternoon one. Uh, Watch this one, share it with maximum people so that we can counter this silly narrative which goes on in our media. भाई भूटान तो भाग गया इंडिया को छोड़ दिया ये हो गया वो हो गया. Understand, Chinese wanted to make it a bilateral issue. By what the prime minister mentioned, India, I won't say is still in the game. It's there. There is just no question in taking that away. Thank you so much, guys. And tomorrow, catch me up in the afternoon with General Dushan Singh, where we will talk about the psychology and the mindset of the Pakistani army. That should tell us a lot with regards where Pakistan is going. Till then, Jai Hind.